Good morning. I'm starting my series on the World Championships, which I'm going through backwards in English. I'm going through forwards in Norwegian. I really think the going through forwards method makes more sense, but I'm committed to it. I'm nothing if not stubbornly dumb, and stubbornly dumb I am. So this is the World Championship between from 2012 between Boris Gelfand from Israel, who here has white, and Annand, the reigning champion. Gelfand, not just because his name sounds so much like Gandalf, but was known as a wizard on the chessboard. He really did have some fantastic attacking ideas and really unusual and good style. And I think as well, by the time we came here to 2012, the match in Moscow, in classical chess, Annand wasn't so dominating as he had been. When he won the World Championship from Kramnik, you couldn't touch, you couldn't come near to his semi-Slav defences, Meran, anti-Meran, and all that kind of thing. And here he plays a semi-Slav defence, and we'll see how it goes. So it turns out to be it's a good attack by both, but it's a brilliant attack by the winner of the game. I don't want to spoil it too much by saying who wins, but it is a fascinating attacking game. It's worth noting that even although he wasn't as dominating in classical chess as he had been, he was still considered the best rapid chess player in the world, and he felt that he had a good chance if the match was drawn. He had a good chance in the rapid tie breaks. It was 12 games they were to play, and yeah, this is the first decisive game. So Gelfand plays d4, Annand plays d5, c4, and Annand's favourite Slav defence. Knight comes to c3 and the knight comes to f6, so he's not gone semi-Slav yet. Pawn comes to e3 and pawn comes to e6, and now we are in a semi-Slav structure. And we're in the main line of the semi-Slav. So you should think this will favour the fantastic semi-Slav spiller that Annand was. A6, this is all theory. It's all about fight at the minute. It's about fighting over the d5 square. Obviously, knight takes. He can take with the knight or either pawn. In this position, if he takes with the pawn, here I like to take with the pawn, with the e pawn to allow the bishop to come out. Problem with taking with the knight is that the pawn can come here and force the knight to move. All right, knight takes pawn is a good alternative, and then when you take with the pawn, you end up with a Grunfeld-like structure without the Grunfeld bishop on g7. So, you know, maybe not ideal for black. So that's why pawn takes is probably favoured. But Gelfand doesn't take the pawn, he pushes past. It's worth noting that a similar line was the win by Annand in his rematch against Carlsen for the World Championship, with a similar kind of idea in the semi-Slav. This pawn push can be difficult for black to deal with. It is a very good way to cramp him. But Vishy just continues with his developments, and the queen comes out, the pawn attacks, the pawn is taken, and the knight takes. The bishop comes out, he attacks the pawn again, doubles up, pawn is taken, takes with the pawn. Again, it's the same kind of idea. If he takes with the knight, then e5 is going to be problematic for white. So he has to settle for the isolated pawn. But one of the advantages of the isolated pawn, apart from the potential outposts on e5 and c5, is the good control over the C and E files, and he already has two pieces actively placed on the C and E files. So bishop comes to d6 to combat possible use of the e5 outpost. Bishop comes to g5 and he castles. The bishop comes to d3 and puts pressure on the h6 pawn. He's threatening to take the pawn and take the pawn. Take the pawn with the bishop. Take the knight with the bishop. Queen takes back, or indeed pawn takes back. Pawn takes back is a rubbish move. And then bishop takes pawn and he's won a pawn. How good a one pawn it is a different matter, because black would immediately have g6, sealing in the bishop. But I think then there is a way to get you take the pawn, takes back with the pawn, knight comes here, and I think there is a way to either get a third pawn or get a significant attack for the bishop. But now that the pawn moves, that's not a theme anymore. So the bishop retreats, and the bishop comes to b7, and black is finished with his development. Queen needs to come to the second rank to be for him to be fully completed in his development. Sorry, but yeah, white has completed. The rooks can see each other, and all the minor pieces are out. But Annand comes to b8. Why not c7? Because there might be some danger in taking on g6 to first damage the pawn structure, and then there might be some danger with playing the knight and attacking the queen on c7. So he doesn't want to put his queen onto that exposed open file. And it's sensible move by Annand. So Gelfand challenges that bishop. He puts the rook on the same open file as the queen to challenge for the open file. The queen comes out of the way, and now he takes on g3, and the pawn takes on g3. And yeah, I think Annand's queen is probably a bit worse. Annand's bishop is probably a bit worse. The two knights are level, and Annand's rook on a8 is probably a bit worse than Gelfand's rook. I would guess the evaluation will say a bolt +6 to 0.6, sorry, to white. Let's just have a look and see what it says. No, not as much. 0.22. So there are the computers are one thing they excel in over humans is finding defensive resources. So yeah. Anyway, carry on with what actually happened. So the queen comes to d6. Good square for the queen, but maybe there's a little bit of weakness here. It might be possible to move the knight, distract the rook from swap off a rook so that rook's no longer defending here, and then win the pawn on a6. It might be. And a good way to go about doing that is by doubling the rooks, which Gelfand quickly does. Now really good grip on the c file, and he's probably got a slightly better grip on the e file when we think about how he's got a good grip on e5. If black could play e5, that would free his position a great deal, but he's not in a position to be able to play e5. So he brings his rook to a half open file. It's not doing anything there, and it might be the case now that that after some swaps, the b pawn will become weak for Gelfand. So the knight comes to a4. I had a thought of playing to e1. Similar idea, open up the c file of the attack, but then you come to e3, and there isn't really a way forward from a3. I thought, okay, well, if he goes to a4, next move c4, not so great. He can take with the knight, but Boris Gelfand, fantastic player, challenged for the World Championship several times. He knows better than me. A4 must be a better move than knight to E1. D1, sorry. So the pawn comes, the knight comes to E4, of course. You know, might just be able to think about making a sacrifice on G3. It's just an irritating position for the knight to be on. And also it means that there's another piece which is influencing C5. So if the knight comes to C5, he's got two knights to choose from to take it with. And if there's a mass swap on C5, it will be Annand who ends up with the queen on C5 when all the pieces are swapped off, which, you know, could well be an advantage for him. Yeah, and then also there is a indirect defense of the a6 pawn. If all these swaps happen, then he takes on the a6 pawn, then Annand can take, and when the queen takes, then queen here check will open up this pawn to attack. So he initiates the first swap, and Annand takes with the bishop. Exactly the correct move. It's better to have the rook still threatening the pawn, the rook on a semi-open file, and the bishop defended there by the king. Is there a threat to play queen takes bishop, rook takes queen, rook takes rook check? Not really. Not really that threatening, especially when you consider that that black could then play knight to f8 to stop the check. So no, it's not a real threat, but there is a threat to play bishop takes knight and queen takes pawn to win a pawn. So Annand goes for an attack, and Gelfand proposes a queen swap. He has to agree to that, and yeah, the pawn comes here to prevent knight coming here if the knight has to move. So the pawn is taken, and the knight comes to d2 and attacks the pawn. f5, and Annand is saying this mass of pawns is going to create an attack for me. And it looks perfectly possible. The knight comes to c4, maybe he's looking at coming to d6. Another attack on the bishop. It also means that the pawn on b7 is defended twice. b2, sorry, is defended twice, so that if the knight moves, it doesn't leave the pawn undefended. So he looks towards moving his knight to a more central position, probably eyeing up the square d5. Knight comes to c5, and the knight comes, as advertised, to d5. The rook comes to a7, so he's actually threatening to win a pawn here. The knight comes to b4, so he's actually threatening to win a pawn here. But Gelfand says, yeah, you go ahead and win that pawn if you dare. And he doesn't dare. So he plays to c2, probably to attack this pawn and support the push e3. Gelfand attacks the rook, and the rook takes. Now there are some serious threats beginning to develop. E3, if you take with the pawn, the knight takes, and you can't defend this pawn anymore, and you're threatening a powerful check there. So, yeah. The bishop is threatened, and Annand says check. So, has Annand an answer to the attack on the bishop? Yeah, he just plays a d2, e2, e3 even. Yeah, if you don't take, I'm gonna get a new queen, says Annand. Gelfand, he has time to take the bishop anyway, since it's check. King comes to h7, and he says check again. And the knight comes to e5. So that there's a possibility of coming to e6, d3 to stop the pass pawn from queening. But of course, if he takes on f2, how's he going to stop the pass pawn there? Well, he plays to e2. The pass pawn is unstoppable. Does he know what he's doing? Of course he does. Gelfand takes on e6, says, yeah, go ahead. Get a new queen. And then I'll just say mate with the knight on g6. And mate is now unavoidable. If he moves his king to avoid that being mate, it doesn't work because rook comes here, check. The knight covers this square. The king is forced back to h8, and knight comes to g6. And again, it's mate anyway. So Annand resigns, and in the was it the 5th or the 6th, 7th game? In the 7th game of the 12-game match, Gelfand takes the lead. So, you know, a really, really lovely attack by both players, actually, and a really lovely win by Gelfand. But I think it does show that Annand wasn't any longer quite as dominant in classical chess as he had been. You know, there were times in the late 90s, early 2000 when it was impossible to do anything with Annand's semi-Slavs opening. He was just unbeatable in it, and here he's been beaten in one of his favourite main line of the semi-Slav as well. So yeah, an interesting first win in the match after 7 games. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.